Good evening, everyone. No, not yet. Sorry. Screwed it up already.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Caffe Lena, and thank you all so much for tuning in tonight, wherever you are tuning in from. It is the final Tuesday of the month, which means that it is storytelling night here at Caffe Lena. And even though we can't have our open mic portion, which we miss so much, we do have three amazing tellers from all over the region who are here to share their amazing stories with us. So our first teller is Lorraine Hartin-Gelardi, and she is going to share some really great stories with us, and she really cares about the power of spoken word to bring people together, and I think right now this is what we really need. So I hope you guys enjoy the show, and if you want to leave any comments or questions in the comments, you can talk to me there, and you can drop some tips into the virtual tip jar. All right, now I'm going to pass it over to Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you all for joining us. We have a live audience of 4 whole people, which, given what's been going on in the past few months, it is a pleasure to see real people and not little boxes. I want to thank Caffè Lena for having us here, for Carolyn and Joe for making this possible with tech work and introductions, and of course to Janine and Christy and Margaret who have kept storytelling alive. Now, when my son Kevin was a kid, I gave him a nickname. You see, Kevin was one of those children, whenever myself or my husband would sit him down to give him one of those long talks that you give your children, he would do what all kids do, especially when they're teenagers. He would put on the face, and he would roll his eyes, and he would sigh. But Kevin was incisive. He would wait for that one Achilles heel moment in whatever we were trying to tell him, that one flaw in our argument, that one weak point, and he would call us out. And he was right. So I took to calling him the Emperor's New Clothes, because he was just like the boy in the story. You know the story. Once there was an emperor who was as vain could be. He didn't care about the affairs of state. He didn't care about the people. All he wanted was for the people to notice him, to pay attention to him, to ooh and ah over him. So he spent all of his time trying to look good. And his wardrobe, well, let me tell you, his wardrobe cost those people a pretty penny. But the emperor paid a price for his vanity. There were 2 swindling weavers who decided to exploit his idea of self-importance. They advertised that they had cloth, very special cloth, that could only be seen by those who were not fools. If you were a fool and looked at the cloth, well, you wouldn't be able to see anything. And when the emperor heard about that, well, he decided he had to have some of that cloth. So those swindling weavers, they moved right into the emperor's city, set up shop in an empty storefront, and pretended to weave on a loom for all to see. Well, it came time to inspect the cloth, and the emperor was a little unsure about that, and so he sent one of his advisors. And the advisor went, and when he looked at the pretend cloth, well, he didn't see anything. But he was not going to admit that he was a fool, and so he said, "Oh, it's fabulous," and went back and reported to the emperor. Well, one by one, the emperor sent his advisors, and they all said the same thing. The cloth is magnificent, wonderful, you're going to love it. And so the emperor did go to see the cloth, along with all the advisors who had previously seen it. And when he saw it, well, he was not going to admit that he was a fool. He turned to the weavers and said, I love it. It's beautiful. I want you to make me a suit of clothes that I can wear in the upcoming parade. And that's exactly what he did. Wearing nothing but his dignity, he paraded out into the streets until a little boy said, "The emperor's got no clothes on." And it was the truth. Everybody knew it. The emperor knew it. But he continued to walk down the street completely naked. But what do you do with that story? I mean, he knew the truth. But knowing the truth isn't enough. You have to do something with it. This is another way to tell that same story. Once, in a kingdom ruled by a young empress, there were two very astute sisters who were seamstresses. They understood human nature. They knew that people are not always what they appear. What they look like on the outside is not always the same as what is on the inside. And so they decided to capitalize on that kind of deception. They went into the business of selling silk, a very special kind of silk. Silk that could only be seen by the innocent. Anyone with a guilty conscience would not be able to see it. And they made a pretty penny selling that cloth to fools who were afraid to admit they could not see it. Now, the empress was planning a celebration for her birthday. And when news of that marvelous cloth came to her, she said, "Oh, I have to have that cloth. Yes, that way I will know exactly who is honest and who is dishonest in my court." And she ordered her messengers to summon the two sisters. And when the sisters got that summons, the youngest one said, "Oh, no, we are in big trouble. Oh, no, the imperial court, it's filled with smart people, educated people, lawyers and scholars and legislators and scientists. When they find out what we've done, they'll arrest us. They'll throw us in jail. We'll be executed." "Don't worry about it," said the older sister. "People are all the same. Those people in the imperial court, they're the same as everybody else. Probably worse. Everything will be fine just as long as you don't lose your nerve." And so the sisters appeared with their cloth. And they made a great show of exhibiting that cloth to all the members of the court. "Isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it just shimmer in the light, kind of like gold? And it's light as a feather. Why, you can barely feel it at all." And when the members of the court looked at the cloth and didn't see anything, they immediately thought of all their past transgressions. And they were determined that no one would find out. No, it's beautiful, lovely, absolutely gorgeous. Even the Empress couldn't see it. She thought to herself of all the things that she had done, all the horrid things she had done in order to secure her throne. No one will ever know, she thought to herself. And then she turned to the two sisters and said, I'm planning a procession through the city. I want you to make me a birthday suit from that cloth. Oh, the sisters. Well, for 2 weeks they came over and they took fittings, measuring the Empress, and then they pretended to sew furiously. But the night before the procession, the youngest sister said, we can't do this. We can't go through with this. What are you talking about? She is going to walk through the streets in front of thousands of people without a stitch on. Someone is going to notice. Someone is going to tell the truth, and then we'll be drawn and quartered. No, we won't. Everyone has a guilty conscience. Everyone in this kingdom has some secret shame. Don't I know it, said the younger sister. I've got a secret shame myself. On the morning of the procession, they went over to the imperial palace and they pretended to help the Empress get dressed. They helped her fasten her undergarments, and they helped button up the back of her dress, and they even helped put the cape around her shoulders. Drums rolled, trumpets blared, and behind a retinue of her court members, the Empress walked out into the streets. And the people, they roared their admiration, hoping that the volume of their admiration covered up their anxiety and surprise. But in between the musical pieces, there was a moment of quiet, and a little girl who was hiding behind her mother's skirts peeked out to get a look at the Empress. Mommy! Mommy, the Empress is naked! The Empress is naked! Well, a hush fell over the crowd. And the Empress, she turned in direction of that sound, and she motioned for her guards to bring over the mother and child. And then she looked right at the little girl. What did you say? I said that you're naked. Oh, said the mother, please, your Imperial Majesty, please don't pay any attention to her. I mean, after all, she's only a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. No, I think she knows exactly what she's saying. She's too young to have developed an guilty conscience. Don't worry. Guards, take them back. Oh, and please, give me your cloak so I have something to wear. Oh, thank you for your mercy and kindness, said the mother, and she went back to the crowd. And the Empress, she held tight to that cloak. And she walked all the way through that city back to the imperial palace. It was a long walk home. And when she got there, the two sisters were arrested and brought to the imperial palace in chains. And the Empress looked at them. Well. You two have achieved quite a feat. You have managed to reveal that every member of my kingdom is dishonest except for one little girl. I don't know whether to reward you for your boldness or execute you for treason. Your Imperial Majesty, said the older sister, please show us compassion. I promise that if you let us go, we will never, ever bother you again. And turning to the younger sister, she said, and you? What do you have to say for yourself? Yes, we did something wrong. Something that was terribly, terribly wrong. And if you think we deserve death, then you should put us to death. Well said. Very well said. Never let it be said that I could not laugh at myself. I mean, it was my foolishness and fear that made me walk out into those streets naked. But maybe it's time for something new. Maybe it is time for a change. You two, you are far too valuable and clever to be put to death. I'm going to make you my official dressmakers, as well as my privy counselors to morality and ethics. Those two sisters took their responsibilities to heart. They were indeed the very best fashion stylists in the kingdom, but they were also very keen judges of character, and the Empress listened to them. And because of their needle-sharp perceptions, she was able to build a court filled with wise and thoughtful people who were able and willing to admit their mistakes. And when her birthday came round the next year, she wore the most fabulous outfit made by the two sisters, and she paraded through the streets of her imperial city with great confidence and delight. And that's another version of that very old story that comes from a woman by the name of Barbara Walker, who wrote a book called Feminist Fairy Tales and another one on knitting. So, of course, you know, it is the Halloween season, and makes sense that we should have a Halloween story, don't you think? And I hope all of you out there listening are enjoying yourself. I feel a little bit like Miss Helen from Romper Room. And I know there are some of you out there listening that understand exactly what I mean when I say, and I see Marnie, and I see Dee, and I see Frank. So here's the story. Ida Dinkins sat straight up in bed. Holy, that was some dream, she said. Ida had dreamed of a long line of people all dressed in black, walking down a lonely, dusty road. And then they had walked off the road into a grassy field. And as they stood around in a circle, moaning and wailing, Ida looked in, and oh, what she saw in that circle, that made her sit right up in bed. You see, Ida had had death dreams before. The first one was when she was a teenager, and she dreamed a death dream. And a week later, her great Aunt Agnes passed away. The next time she had a death dream, her cousin's husband, Marvin, he died in an accident at the factory. The third time, the next-door neighbor's cat was run over by the ice cream truck. Ida wasn't sure if that counted as a real death dream. But now she waited. She waited to see who was going to die. And she found out on a Thursday afternoon when her husband Theodore came home from work. He came home early, stood right in the center of the kitchen, and keeled over onto the floor. A few minutes later, the doctor pronounced him dead due to a heart attack. Now, the very first thing that Ida did was to cover all the mirrors in the house with black crepe fabric. Because, if you don't do that, well, then the image of the dead person will stare out at you from that mirror. And the last thing Ida Dinkins wanted in this world was to have her husband Theodore staring out at her every day. Well, they buried Theodore. And as was the custom, everybody came back to the house to have a little food and to talk about the deceased. Well, his best friend sat right down in the rocking chair next to the fireplace, and he started to talk. He said, I'm going to miss Theodore. He was a stubborn soul. There was no one quite like Theodore. I mean, once Theodore got an idea into his head, there was nothing you could do to change him. And the minute he said that, well, the front door blew open wide, and an icy gust of wind filled the room. And standing right there in the doorway was none other than Theodore Dinkins himself. Well, that caused everybody in the house to run outside, except for Ida. And Theodore looked around. He said, what's going on here? He looked at the black crepe. He looked at Ida in her best black dress. He said, what's going on? It looks like somebody died. Who died? You did, said Ida. Me? I'm not dead. I feel fine. Theodore, you are dead. He said, just go back to the graveyard where you belong. I'm not going, said Theodore. I feel just fine. I'm not going anywhere. And he sat right down in the rocking chair by the fire. And he started to rock back and forth, back and forth, day after day, night after night. Well, I gotta tell you, sitting that close to the fire, Theodore began to dry up. Oh, yes, and his skin, well, it started to flake off. All poor Ida ever did was just sweep, 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 picking up dustpan after dustpan of dry, flaky skin, until the only thing left sitting in that rocking chair was Theodore Dinkins. And he continued to rock, clickety-click, click, click, clickety-clack, clack, clack, clickety-click, click, click. Well, this whole thing presented a problem for Ida. You see, she needed him to go back to the graveyard, because without a body, you can't collect on the life insurance. And you see, if Ida didn't collect on the life insurance, she wasn't going to be able to pay for the coffin. And that meant that the undertaker was going to come and take the coffin back. And if that happened, what was she going to do with Theodore? Didn't bother Theodore one bit. He looked at his wife as she repeatedly kept telling him, Theodore, you got to go back. You got to go back to the graveyard. Ida, I don't think you miss me at all. How can I miss you? You ain't even gone. Well, one night, there was a little knock on the door. And when Ida opened it, there was the best fiddler in town. He had heard that Theodore died, and he thought, well, maybe I'll come and court the widow. And when Ida saw him, she invited him right in. She gave him a seat right next to the fire, right across from Theodore. And the fiddler sat down. And Ida sat down. And of course, Theodore was sitting down. And there they were, all three of them, just looking at each other, not knowing what to say. And finally, Theodore said, this isn't much fun. Fiddler, do you play that thing? Uh-huh. Well, why don't you pick up the fiddle? Play us some music. I feel like dancing. And old Theodore, he got right up out of that rocking chair as the fiddler tuned up his bow. And when that fiddler started playing, Theodore started dancing. Clickety-click, click, click, clackety-clack, clack, clack. And I gotta say, for a skeleton, it wasn't too bad. Well, he was dancing around the room, a-dancing and a-dancing and a-dancing, and the fiddler was a-playing and a-playing and a-playing, and Theodore, he threw up his arm. And it completely disconnected from the socket. And it went flying across the room, and it landed on the floor with a click, clack, clack. And the fiddler, he just put down his bow and looked at Ida, and he said, I think he's falling apart. Said Ida. Well then, play faster. Well, that fiddler did. He played every tune he could think of. He played Turkey in the Straw, The Devil Came Down to Georgia, on, and Theodore, well, he just kept dancing. Clickety-click, click, click, clackety-clack, clack, clack. And as he went dancing, well, I have to say, his bones just kept dropping. A leg here, a foot there, a wrist there, until all that was left of Theodore Dinkins was a pile of bones scattered all over the floor. And right in the center of the room was his big old bald skeleton head. And he looked right up and said, "Whoa, this is kind of fun." Well, that was enough for the fiddler. He took one look at everything there, just dropped his fiddle and ran. And I don't think anyone ever saw him again. Ida looked at Theodore. She said, "Well, Theodore, look around. What do you think? Are you dead?" "Yeah, Ida, I think I'm dead." "Good. I'm going to take you back to the graveyard where you belong." And Ida Dinkins picked up all those bones. She put them right into her apron and carried Theodore back to the graveyard where he belonged. And she opened the lid of that coffin. She put those bones in. She rearranged them in such a way that Theodore would never be able to put himself back together again. And then she went home. But folks say that sometimes if you go by that graveyard on a quiet night like tonight and you listen really carefully, you can hear a faint clickety-click, click, click, clackety-clack, clack, clack. Because there's part of old Theodore that still wants to get up and dance. And that is an old story. Thank you. Oh my gosh. That is something that does not happen on Zoom. You just don't get that. Well, the fun is still to come because we have two more tellers. It is my pleasure to introduce Alan McClintock, who comes from Troy, New York. Now, I have known Alan for several years. I am not going to say how many, Alan, because I just don't think that's right. But one of the things, I met Alan early on in my storytelling career, and I've always admired the way he puts a story together. He has a wonderful voice and a commitment to the integrity of his stories. Alan has said he's been telling stories since the 80s, and his first story was at the Albany Story Circle, so they have spawned a great many wonderful tellers. He's told at Clearwater, he's told at the local dance flurry, and many other places, and we are delighted to listen to you once again. Alan McClintock.
Thank you very much. It's so good to see someone. I know that Lorraine thanked Lena, and I'd like to do that as well, and the storytellers from the Saratoga area who made this possible. I'd also like to send out this first story to Tom Weekly in Vermont. I hope you're listening, Tom. It's been too long since I've had an opportunity to speak with you. In fact, I was trying to figure that out today, and it might be decades. But in my pocket, I have this eggcorn that Tom gave me and that he had in his pocket at the National Storytelling Festival. Tom used to say that he would drive miles to hear me read the phone book. So I hope that you enjoy this, Tom. It was a late October day. It was the day of the full moon. The wind and the rain had raked the forest canopy, and there was a blanket of leaves that had fallen on the forest floor. There were red maples and yellow, and there were golden oaks, and there were yellow locusts and birch. And if you looked real closely, you would see the folded, plum-colored staghorn sumac that had already fallen off. And sitting there beside the trail was Hare. And he was looking out at the forest and watching the squirrels as they went about collecting acorns. They were busy, and he wondered if they even remembered where they buried them. And there were chipmunks, and they were very industrious. They were running back and forth. Who knows where they were going? Even Hare wondered himself. It was a special day, you see, because this was the day that Hare was going to have lunch with his very good friend, the tortoise. Now, I know you find that hard to believe. That very same tortoise that bested him in that race long ago. Well, they'd since become good friends. In fact, Hare applauded Tortoise's cleverness. And for decades now, they would meet at this spot in the forest on full moon days. And they would sit and they would tell stories about the places where they had been, their adventures, and they would talk about their families, their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, because the both of them had many. Hare sat there. He smelled the pine, and he could sense that winter was near at hand. He was thumping his hind leg, waiting for Tortoise. Tortoise was rarely punctual. He eventually would make his way, and sure enough, there was a rustling in the leaves, and out from the blanket came Tortoise. He was covered in reds and golds and yellows. He saw his friend and said, "Oh, Hare, it is so good to see you." And Hare said, "Tortoise, my friend, it is good to see you as well." And they sat down next to one another. Not a minute went by, and they continued to talk about the things that they had done. And now high in the forest canopy, a crow called out an alarm call. "Caw, caw, caw." And the two friends backed away into the underbrush, waiting to see if it was a friend or a foe that was going to make their way along the path. They waited some time. They could hear the crinkling of leaves, but no one appeared, not right away anyway. And it went on for some time, and then around the corner from a tree, they could see a human. And the human was a tall man. He was wearing a bulky sweater. He was wearing those skinny jeans that were the rage. Half of his head was shaved, and he had a lock of hair that had fallen down. He had thick black frame glasses. And as he ambled along the path, he was staring at his palm. Well, Tortoise and Hare watched as he came, and every so often he would brush his finger across his palm. And Hare said, "What's he doing?" And Tortoise said, "Maybe he has a sliver, and he's trying to tease it out." Well, he continued to walk along. He didn't take notice of the squirrels or the chipmunks. He didn't drink in the color of the day. And he certainly did not see the tortoise or the hare. And he continued to amble along down the path, staring at his palm. Well, the two friends watched, and it took forever for the man to walk down the path and disappear. And Tortoise said to Hare, he said, "You know, I thought they were faster than that." And Hare said, "I've seen them run once or twice, but he's really as slow as molasses in January." Well, the two of them looked at the trail, and then Tortoise said, "Let's play a game. Let's race the human to the pond. We'll count to 100. I think he really needs a head start." So Tortoise started counting. Now, Tortoise in his own way was a contrarian. And he said, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Hare just shook his ears and twitched his nose and said, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This went on for some time. They eventually reached 100, and they set off at a leisurely pace. It wasn't long before they overtook the man. They went right by him. He didn't seem to notice because he was still staring at his palm. They took refuge under a great white pine that was right near the pond, and they waited for the human to come along. And there he was, ambling down the path in his very slow, deliberate way, looking at his palm. They wondered why he never tripped or ran into anything. And all of a sudden, they heard a screeching sound from above. and there was an osprey above the pond, circling and tightening his circle. And the osprey folded its wings and fell into the pond without even a splash, and lifted up, and in his talons he carried a golden fish. And the tortoise just licked his lips. And the hare said, "Wow." And the human just kept on walking along, staring at his palm. He walked right by a great blue heron. And the great blue heron was there in the shallows fishing, darting its head into the water. He swallowed 3 fish whole. The human didn't notice. He just kept on walking along, staring at his palm. It was very bewildering. Like hare and tortoise, they couldn't understand. And tortoise said to hare, he said, "It's no wonder the earth is crying." And all of a sudden they heard laughter. And down at the far end of the pond, there was an old man. He had a straw hat on and rubber boots and a big, huge white mustache, bigger than mine. He had a remote control device in his hand, and he had a sailboat on the pond. And he was directing it around, tacking it left and right. It would lean to the side, and he would right it. And he had the biggest smile on his face. But he wasn't alone, no. His grandsons were with him. There were 2 of them. They were playing tag. They were throwing the leaves in the air, and they were laughing at one another. And that other human, he just kept on walking by, staring at his palm. Well, the boys had a sack with them, and one of them reached inside, and it was filled with cracked corn, and he scattered it upon the shore. And the next thing that happened was he was surrounded by mallards. And they were quacking, quack, 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 quack. And the boys laughed and roared. And out of nowhere came a skein of 25 Canadian geese. They raised up their wings and they hit the water and slid on their breasts right over to where that food was. And that other human just walked by, staring at his palm. Well, Tortoise looked over at the laughter and the fun, and he said to his friend Hare, he said, "Well, maybe there's hope for them yet." And they watched as that other human walked away. And you know, I did say it was a special day. It was not only special because it was the day of the full moon, but it was also the day that Tortoise would return to the pond. He said farewell to his friend the hare. He began to enter the water. He looked over at the laughing children, and he gave a little tortoise smile, if you can imagine that. And he disappeared under the waves, and Hare watched as the bubbles bubbled up and disappeared. For Tortoise was on his way home to the bottom of the pond where he would spend the rest of the winter. And he really couldn't wait to the returning spring so that he could see his good friend, the hare, again. And Hare looked over, and the human continued to walk away. And Hare just shook his ears and twitched his nose. He too looked at the old man and the boys, and he wiggled his tail and hopped off into the forest to return home to his own family so he could share with them what he had seen and done that day. Thank you. Now, it was the deepest, darkest night. I mean, much darker than tonight. And the sky was, well, the earth was black, really, and the sky was a dark midnight blue. Making his way across the great wood, there was an old man, half blinded by the limbs of trees. In one outstretched hand, he had a lantern. It was a candle lantern, and the candle fluttered in the evening breeze. And with his other hand, he pulled himself along over roots and rocks. You could hear he was laboring. His breath, you could hear the panting as he went, and you could hear the clicking of his heart. The man was exhausted. He pulled himself up, and he leaned his back against a sturdy oak, and he looked out into the forest. It was hard to really know how old or how tall the man was because his back was bowed and bent, as though he had spent a lifetime carrying a heavy burden. His hair and beard were long and white, uncut. Why, his beard fell below his waist. And his beard and hair were filled with twigs and seeds and grasses that he had collected and gathered during his journey. His fingernails were long, and they were uncut as well, and the nail beds were filled with soil from his chore. His eyes were bloodshot. His skin was wrinkled, and it hung in furbelows from his neck and his armpits. He looked out into the darkness. You could see his heart beating through his thin, worn clothes. In the distance, he saw a twinkling light, and he thought for an instant, a hearth, a home, a meal. And he set out towards the light. With every step the man took, the toes in his feet burned. And you could hear the screeching of his joints, his knees and elbows and hips and ankles. He stumbled and fell and pulled himself up and continued on his way across the vast wood. You could hear his breath as he made his way. You could hear the beating of his heart. And he continued until he came to a glade that was right on the edge of the forest. And there was a log bungalow. And there was just the sweetest, mellowest yellow light that beamed out from the windows. The man let out a huge sigh. He pulled himself up and began to climb up the steps just as his lantern burned out. And there he stood in the glow of the yellow light. And he reached to knock on the door. He slipped and fell. He hit the door. The door spun open and the man tumbled on the floor. Sitting inside near the hearth fire, rocking and knitting, was the most beautiful woman. She was ageless. She had a long, thick, heavy silver braid that hung over the rocker all the way to the floor. She heard the sound and she turned and she saw the man there. And she got up, set down her knitting, and she ran to him. And she cradled that old man in her arms as though he were her only child. She carried him back to the rocker in the fire, and she began to rock him there. And as she rocked, she took her cool palm and she soothed his brow, and she said, "There now, there." And the night continued to pass, and still she rocked. And the mantle clock struck midnight. She was still rocking The man was gone, and in his place there was a young man, tall and thin and trim, long blonde hair, fast asleep. And still the woman rocked, and she soothed the young man's brow. There now, she said, there. And the night continued to pass. It was almost dawn, and still she rocked. But in her lap, the young man was gone, and there was a child, a small boy, no more than a toddler, fast asleep. His fists balled up and held tightly to his body. His cheeks were a brush of red. He had the most amazing crown of blonde, golden, curly hair. And the woman took her hands and she pushed it through his hair and she plucked out 3 strands. She took the first one and she threw it upon the hearthstone, and it rang out. The vibration filled her house and was gone. She took the second hair and she cast it upon the hearthstone, and it rang out louder than even the first. And when it was gone and the house was still, she took the third hair and she cast it upon the hearthstone, and it rang out again, this time even louder than the second. When the vibration ended and there was silence again, the little boy's eyes began to flutter. And he looked up at the woman and he smiled. He took his balled fist and he rubbed his eyes. He pushed himself down from her lap. And he let out a huge stretch and yawn. "Oh," he said. And he made his way to the door. And he pulled that door open and he leapt into the sky to become the new day's sun. The woman went to the door. She saw the shadows in the forest change. She watched the sun arcing overhead. She let out a wave, and then she returned and shut the door to take her bed. And every day, the sun makes that journey. And at the end of the day, exhausted and weary, broken down from carrying the burden, the sun makes its way back home to be nurtured by that woman and to be set out again for another day. And I know it's true because today when I woke up, the sun was in the sky. And I hope it'll be there tomorrow as well. Thank you very much. I have the great pleasure of inviting our final teller this evening, Karen Pillsworth. Now, Karen and I, we go way back. I won't tell you how far back. She's much younger than the 40 or 50 years we've known one another. She's a wonderful storyteller from the Hudson Valley. She's performed in so many places. She's even performed in Australia. And I heard that they'll still let her back in the country. So please welcome Karen Pillsworth. You're in for a treat. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I too, like Lorraine and Alan, ditto the thanks for bringing storytelling here to Caffe Lena. And as well, I'd like to thank everybody out there who were at least pretending is out there listening. Because we have to believe, kind of like Tinkerbell, that just clap, clap, and we know we're keeping storytelling alive. I also would like to thank Alan and Lorraine. It's wonderful to share the stage with you, and why I thought going last was a good idea, I really don't know, but here we go. So this first story comes with a wish at the end of it. It is dedicated to my daughter, Caitlin. In the summer of 1994, I had a grant to do some research. I had to research the history and folklore of the Hudson Valley and to write stories. This was a dream come true for me, not for her. As I dragged her that entire summer to every stone house and every museum in the Hudson Valley, at the end she looked at me and said, "I never want to see another copper pot. I never want to go to another stone house. I have seen enough for my entire life." So this story is for her. The little girl hated museums. She hated having to walk on the blue carpet. She hated having to stay behind the velvet ropes. And she hated not being able to touch anything. But her mother loved museums. And so every Saturday she would pack the little girl up to go on what the mother thought was another great adventure. The little girl, not so much. On this morning, she woke up and she said, "Please, Mommy, I'd rather do almost anything. I'll wash the car, I'll cut the grass, but do we have to go to a museum?" "Oh," said the mother, "there's a special exhibit, a traveling exhibit, and it's going to be in a museum not far from here, and it's only going to be here for a short time, and it's something I really want you to see." The little girl looked at her mother. She loved her mother. And so she got dressed, and off they went. Well, they went through the first few rooms, and the little girl looked, and she stayed on the blue carpet, and she stayed behind the velvet ropes, and she didn't get to touch anything. And finally she said to her mother, "This is it, right? This is good. We've seen a good amount of this museum. It's time to go." "No," said the mother. "In the next room is the special exhibit. Oh, wait till you see it." So she walked in with her mother, and weirdly, they were the only ones in the room. It was a pretty big room, and it had a platform, and of course there was the blue carpet and the velvet ropes. And on the platform, the little girl could see one object. And she looked at it. It was a piece of wood on 4 sticks. And she went over and she read the placard, and it had one word. It said, "Table." "Great," said the little girl. "This was really good. I mean, this is great. I don't know what it is, but boy, this is great, Mom. Can we go?" "No," said the mother. Did you read the sign?" "I did," the little girl said. "It says table. It's a piece of wood on 4 sticks. I don't really know what this is all about." "Oh," said the mother, "it's so much more. Let me tell you." And then the little girl knew there was no going back. "Okay, Mom, go ahead. This is a table. My grandmother had one of these. It was in a room called a dining room, and people ate all of their meals around it." "All of their meals?" "Yes," said the mother. "They ate breakfast, not like a bowl of cereal like we have now, but there was bacon and eggs, or pancakes, or French toast, or steaming bowls of oatmeal with fruit." "And they ate all together at the same time?" said the little girl. "Well, maybe not exactly at the same time, because they had to go to work and school at different times, but always they had a good breakfast, because it was thought that breakfast was the most important meal of the day." "Uh-huh," said the little girl. "And lunch?" She hoped if she gave her mother some hints, we could move this along a little bit. "Well, lunch, not every day, because people did go to work and school, but in the summer, there would be big bowls of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches." "Uh-huh," said the little girl. "And dinner?" "Dinner was the best," said the mother. "First, they had to set the table." Set the table? Set it where? It already had its own room. I mean, where are you going to put the table? No, 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 said the mother. Set the table means put out the place settings. There would be a dish, and to the left there would be a cloth napkin with a fork, and on the right a knife and a spoon, and above that a glass, a real glass made of glass, and sometimes there'd be a coffee cup. And steaming platters and bowls of food would be brought in and set on the table, and people would sit, and they would hold hands, and they would say a prayer. They would thank the farmers that grew the food and the people who prepared the food, the people who were at the table, and the people who were absent from the table. And then the food would be passed one to the other, each one taking exactly what they needed, making sure there was enough food for everybody else at the table. And then there would be laughing and talking, and the parents would always ask the children, "What did you do at school today?" And just like you, they would say, "Nothing." But they couldn't get away with that. They had to say at least one thing, even if it was that they played stickball in the schoolyard at lunchtime. And then, if they were really lucky, there would be dessert. Oftentimes, they opened a jar of canned fruit, and sometimes, if they were really lucky, there was Jell-O with a squirt of whipped cream out of the can. And then the children would ask to be excused. "Oh," said the little girl, "excused? Did they do something improper?" "No," said the mother. They would have to say, "May I please be excused?" And then if their plate was empty, they were allowed to leave the table. And the parents would stay on a little bit longer, and they would talk and have coffee, and then everybody was called back to clean up. "You mean to put the dishes in the dishwasher?" "Oh, no, there weren't no dishwashers, no. One would wash and one would dry, and they would put away the dishes, and someone would spread a fresh tablecloth on the table so it would be ready for breakfast in the morning." I remember my grandmother telling me that she loved to dry the dishes when her dad washed because it was the only time the two of them had together, the only time it was just them sharing their thoughts. And the whole time they were eating, said the little girl, nobody looked at their iPhone or their tablet. "No," said the mother, "they hadn't been invented yet." "Great," said the little girl. So they ate all their meals at this piece of wood on 4 sticks. Oh, but I didn't tell you the best thing. There were holidays. Now, at holidays, they invited everybody over, and they put leaves in the table. Well, this really perplexed the little girl. So now they have this wooden thing on 4 sticks, and they go outside and they put leaves on it. "No, no," said the mother. "Leaves are big rectangular wooden things, and the table could be opened from the middle, and the leaves would be set in, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger until it fit everybody. And my grandmother had a stand in the corner where 6 leaves stood in, and that table could be opened really, really big. And people would come, and the steaming bowls and platters of food would be placed, and they would say their prayer, and they'd stay at the table a long time laughing and telling stories. And the children didn't even want to be excused because it was so much fun to be there with all their cousins and aunts and uncles. And then everybody would help to clean up, and then they would go home." Little girl started thinking about this. "I have a question." "Yes, of course." So they had this piece of wood on 4 sticks in a room called a dining room, and all they did was eat at it? I mean, that seems like a waste. I really don't understand. "Oh," said the mother, "no, no, no. There were a lot of things done at the table. Homework was done at the table. And my grandmother, she was a teacher. She used to write out her report cards on the table, and the table was pine. It was soft. So when she got up and picked up her report card, we could see everybody's names and grades still in the table. We didn't tell, though. And laundry was done. It was taken in from the clothesline and Wasn't there a dryer?" "Oh, no," said her mother. "This was way back when they used wind and solar power to dry the clothes." "Uh-huh," said the little girl. And then the clothes were folded, and everybody shook their own pile and put them away. Everybody had to put their own clothes away? Yes, that was part of it. They had to put their own clothes away. "What else?" said the little girl, because now she was a little bit interested in this piece of wood on 4 sticks. "Well," said the mother, "jigsaw puzzles were done. Sometimes everybody would sit down at one end of the table, kind of all squished together for their meal so that the jigsaw puzzle could be laid out on the other end. And it could take days or weeks sometimes to put it together, but everybody took part in that. Sometimes the parents sat at the table and did crossword puzzles, and sometimes, after the children were thought to be asleep, the parents would sit at the table writing out their bills and trying to figure out how to make ends meet. The little girl thought she didn't want to know what that meant. And then, of course, pumpkins were carved at the table, and Easter eggs were dyed, and Christmas cards were written out. You mean they took their computer and they sent out e-cards? No, said the mother, computers hadn't been invented yet. They took real paper that opened up, and inside they would write a personal note to every person they were sending a card to. And then they would put it in the envelope and address it and put a stamp on it and take it to the post office and mail it. You know, snail mail. Sometimes you get a birthday card in the mail. The little girl thought about that. She liked that. She liked opening up that special piece of paper and seeing what someone had written to her. Now she was really intrigued. Well, what else did they do at the table? Oh, let's see, said the mother. They wrapped Christmas and birthday presents. Sometimes they would take out a sewing machine and they would repair clothes or at Halloween make Halloween costumes. There were so many things they did at the table. Sometimes on weekends, after the children were in bed, the parents would invite their neighbors over and they would play cards and drink highballs. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, there was just a lot of things done at the table. There were lists that were made, and I don't know, said the mother. I think the most important thing that went on at the table were the stories. They would tell stories about new babies being born into the family, or sometimes friends who were being laid to rest. They would tell stories about long ago, and they would tell stories about wishes and dreams yet to come true. The mother was quiet. The little girl looked at her, and she saw a tear roll down her mother's cheek. And then her mother took the little girl's hand, and she wiped the tear away, and she said, "You have been great. So thank you so much for coming. I really wanted you to see this exhibit. It's really something special, and we don't really know if we'll ever see these objects again. So let's go to lunch, though. You've been great." The little girl looked at her mother, and she looked at the table. She held tight to her mother's hand, and she said, "Do you think that we could find some place to go to lunch where they still have a table?" Thank you. It is my wish at the end of this story that when we all come out of this long, dark hole of the pandemic, that each of us can gather around a table that has a lot of leaves in it, and we can be with all our families and friends again. Check my time. And that, of course, is for Caitlin, who will go to museums now. But it took her quite a while after that summer to think that going to a museum was a really good idea. Sometimes in life, if we're really lucky, a person comes into our life and stays with us a long time, and then even after they're gone, they're still with us. It's amazing. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about that special person of mine. She was born in 1902, the oldest of 7 siblings. She never married. She became the family matriarch. Her name at birth was Honoria Veronica Sangaline, but everyone called her Hannah, and she was my hero. My Aunt Hannah graduated in 1926 from the Kingston Hospital School of Nursing, one of 6 proud graduates that year. She traveled across the country all by herself before women did those kinds of things, she always reminded me. She inspired and amazed me. But most of all, she let me eat candy out of all the candy dishes. And she let me play with the button tin that she kept under the buffet in the dining room, the one my mother would never allow me to play with because she was sure I would choke on a button. She gave me her old tin plates, and for hours I would sit in the backyard making mud pies. And when I stayed over at her house, I could stay up as late as I wanted to. My Aunt Hannah taught me so many things. She taught me how to use the chamber pot that she kept under the bed. She taught me how not to listen in on the party line. She taught me how to feed the ducks in the backyard, which she failed to tell me we would be having for Christmas dinner. My Aunt Hannah taught me how to speak up and speak out, how to snap peas and love cats, how to plant a vegetable garden, and how to prune roses. But the most important thing she taught me was how to grow older. We didn't grow old, my Aunt Hannah and me, but we did get older. She taught me how to listen and how to be heard. She taught me how to care for others and how to let others care for you, which is a really hard lesson. She never lectured me. Her wisdom was handed down in simple, wondrous ways. So the other day, when someone called me a crone, I didn't get upset because I had learned from the best crone, my Aunt Hannah. Now, some women get really upset when they hear the word crone because they think of a hag, but that's all wrong. A crone is an old, wise woman, a woman who has lived long enough to acquire knowledge not just from books, but from experiences. I even have the bumper sticker on my car. It says CRONE, Creative Researcher of New Experiences. I still love new experiences, new adventures, but I'm going to tell you something. When I was younger, I used to be able to get ready a lot quicker for these experiences. I would set my alarm for 6 o'clock, never hit the snooze alarm. I would get out of bed, get into the shower, wash myself with Dove soap, shampoo my hair with Lemon Up shampoo. Anybody remember Lemon Up? It had the lemon on the top of it, the big yellow bottle. And then I would get out, dry myself off, put on my, curl my eyelashes, put on my mascara, eat my breakfast, be out the door by 6:30. Now I have to start getting ready the night before. I know you're laughing, but some of you know this is true. About 9 o'clock, I put on my pajamas. I go into the bathroom and I wash my face with a very gentle soap. Then I apply some plumper cream to my cheeks so they don't look sunken in. And then I have to apply de-plumper under my eyes, otherwise you could pack those babies for a week. And then because my hair is thinning and I don't like to wash my hair every day, I set it in rags the way my mother used to do. I take a big, long piece of material and I bobby pin it to the top of my head. Then I take my hair, a piece of it, wrap it around, then wrap the rag back on top and tie it in a bow. It takes about 6 of these and my hair is done. But I can't sleep with those things hanging around my face, so I take them all up on top of my head in a little scrunchie, and I have an elegant top knot right there on the top of my head. Then I brush and floss my teeth and put in my mouth guard so I don't grind the enamel off my teeth while I sleep. And then I pee. Got to pee one more time, right? Because otherwise you're up and down, up and down, up and down. And then I get into bed and I put on my sleep apnea mask. Now I kind of look like a cross between Cindy Lou Who from How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Mr. Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. But I get a really good night's sleep. That alarm goes off in the morning. I'm still a morning girl. I hit that alarm. I don't hit the snooze alarm, and now I kind of shuffle to the bathroom. I look in the mirror. I think, I have to weigh myself. So, of course, I take off my pajamas because you know the pajamas weigh 2 or 3 ounces at most, and you can never get on the scale while you still have the pajamas on. And then I brush my teeth, and I get ready to go for my walk. In the winter, this requires a lot of layers. And of course, I put the wool hat on to cover the elegant top knot that's still sticking up on the top of my head. I come back after my 2-mile walk. I do my Fitboard and weights for about 10 minutes, and then I hula hoop for 5, hoping to keep some semblance of a waist now after menopause. You have to keep trying that. So now I'm ready. I go up to take a shower. Now I have to shower with a different soap for my face than I do for the rest of my body because I don't want it to dry out. And, well, here's where I make up the time. Did you know after menopause, the hair under your arms and legs stops growing? Think of the valuable minutes I save by not having to shave. And now I also use that lotion that you put on in the shower while you're still wet before you towel off, again, saving valuable minutes. So now I go to the mirror and I have to apply a little more makeup than I did. First, I put my SPF lotion on because, you can't be out there in the sun. And then I put on a little foundation and blush. I still curl my eyelashes and put on my mascara. I get dressed. I go downstairs. I slam back a green shake and a probiotic because how else can you start the day? And then I check my pocketbook to make sure that I have my tweezers. Because you just know that hair that stopped growing on your leg is going to pop out of your chin at the most inopportune moment. And you got to have your tweezers and the rear view mirror in the car and the natural sunlight in order to pluck that baby out. So I'm all set to go now. I check my watch. It's 9:30. I am ready for a new adventure. And my Aunt Hannah would be so proud. I haven't told that story too much because really it reveals way too much about me. So, yeah. But some of you know, this just happens and, you got to go with it. I have 2 little short stories to end my set, both of them kind of for different reasons. This next story is what I call a gift story. A lot of times, tellers tell stories, amazing stories, and sometimes people create their own versions of them and they tell them, to other people. But this story is a story I hope you will take and you will give to somebody else. And I'll tell you why. I moved in one period of my life 13 times in 13 years. My son didn't like moving. Always thought he wasn't going to have more friends and he was shyer. But my daughter, she was just like me. She loved moving. Every move was going to be a new adventure. But for people like my son who don't like moving, I knew there had to be a story. So this is the story. It's a gift. I hope you'll take it and you'll give it to somebody you know who might have to move and doesn't really want to. And it goes like this. Hi, I'm Margaret, but Maggie's who I really am. I live with my mother and my father and let me tell you, things were going along just great. Until one day, my father came home from work, and he came running into the house. He was so excited, and he said to my mother, "Guess what, honey? I finally got that promotion." My mother got so excited, too. She started jumping up and down. Have you ever seen your mother jump up and down? It's a pretty funny thing. And then my father went over to her, and he put his hands on her shoulders and kind of locked his elbows so she couldn't get really close. And he said, "Well, there is one thing we hadn't counted on. We're being transferred." All of a sudden, my mother didn't look so happy anymore. And my brother, he started shaking his head going, "You know what that means, Maggie? We're going to go someplace where there's nothing but strangers. We're not going to know anybody, just strangers." Well, I didn't really know anything at all about this being transferred thing, but I soon found out. Being transferred means that one day some men and women come into your house and they pack everything up and they put it in a big truck. They even packed our garbage. Really, I'm telling you the truth. Being transferred means that you have to go live someplace where your grandma and your grandpa are not going to be. Being transferred means that one day you stand in your big empty living room and there's nothing there but an echo and a really funny feeling right here under your heart. Well, that day came for us. The movers took everything away in the boxes, and we got in the car and we got ready to go. It would have been great, you know. To me, it was an adventure, but my brother was sitting next to me going, "Strangers, Maggie, just strangers. That's all we're going to see." Well, before we started to drive away, my mom's friend Alice came running across the lawn. She had a present all wrapped up, and my mother rolled down the window. Remember that? Roll down the window. And Alice put the present in on her lap. And she said, "This is for you. It's a goodbye gift. I'm really going to miss you." My mother said thanks, and she kind of hugged the present to her and rolled up the window. We drove, and we drove, and we drove, and I kept thinking, open the present. Just open the present. I mean, when it's my birthday, I don't want to wait to kiss Grandma and Grandpa. I don't want to blow out the candles. I just want to open the present. Well, my mother didn't open it, and we drove some more, and we drove so far that we had to stay overnight in a hotel that had a swimming pool. I mean, already this adventure was so great, but my brother kept saying, "Strangers, Maggie, just strangers." Well, the next day, we got to our new house. The movers came and brought everything in. They didn't put it in the right place. I don't know why. We had to do that all ourselves. And then the next day, my dad went off to that new job. It seemed so exciting to me. But when he came home, he didn't look as excited as the day he told us we were being transferred. And he said, "You know, I already miss my golf buddies." And my mom said, "I miss Grandma and Grandpa and Alice." And my brother said, "I miss all the guys on the baseball team." And I said, "I miss smiles and feeling happy inside." But did anybody listen? No. So I went into the kitchen to get myself something chocolate, because that always makes me feel better. And when I got in there, there was the goodbye gift still all wrapped up on the counter. Well, if nobody was going to open this, I was going to have to do it. So I tore the paper off, and I looked at it. It was about this big. It had a little metal bar across the top, and it had to be plugged in, but I was big enough. I was a good plugger-inner. So I plugged it in, and I knew what this was. My Aunt Marie had one of these. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you something. But if you've ever moved to a new house, you already know this. When you move to a new house, you have to do what is officially called move to the new house big shopping. It's when you go to the grocery store and you buy 2 cartloads of groceries. One of them is entirely filled with canned goods. Nobody knows why. Sometimes you move those cans to the next house, but it must be done. And we had gone to the big shopping that day. So, woo, woo, woo. Woo, woo, woo. I was probably up to can number 96 when my family came to the kitchen door. "Maggie, what have you done?" said my mother. And my father said, "Oh, Mags, there's enough food here for the people on both sides of the street." And my brother said, "All right, Maggie's going to get the first punishment in the new house, not me." Well, then my mother and my father got what they called a really good idea. It was like the little light bulb went off over their head. And my father and brother went up and down all the streets and knocked on all those strangers' doors and told them what I had done and invited them to come for dinner. My mom and I got so busy making pies and cakes and casseroles out of all of those empty cans of food that we forgot about being lonely. At 7 o'clock, our doorbell rang so many times, we just left the door open, and all those strangers came into our house. Didn't take us very long to realize they weren't strangers. They were just friends we hadn't met yet. That all happened a long time ago last year. I've got lots of friends now. My friend Milton came over the other day. He didn't look so good. "Milton," I said, "what's the matter?" "Maggie, we've been transferred." I ran to the kitchen. I got the goodbye gift. I say, "Take this, Milton. It works magic on strangers." Thank you. That story actually came from a second grade controlled reader. by Sue and Jerry Millard. It's been out of print for a long time, but the credit goes to them for that story. I have just a couple minutes, and I'm going to end with this story, which is perhaps not a gift story, but I think an appropriate story for our times, these most interesting times, and a story for you to think about and to pass on to your children and grandchildren. Here it goes. I think you already know the characters. Once upon a time, there were 3 pigs and their mama pig. And one day the mama pig said, you know, it's time for you guys to move out. You are plenty big enough to be on your own, but there are a couple things you should know. First of all, do not build your house out of anything but bricks. Your uncles, rest their souls, built their house out of straw and sticks, and we know what happened to them. The other thing is, there are a lot of germs out there, and so you need to remember to wash your hands. Now, you need to wash them before you go out, you need to wash them when you come home, and you have to sing this song twice when you're washing your hands. You have to sing, wash, wash, wash your hands, hear the doctor say, back and front and fingers, so germs will go away. And now the 4 people in the audience are going to sing along with me. Are you ready? Wash, wash, wash your hands, hear the doctor say, back and front and fingers, so germs will go away. And off the little pigs went. Well, they were all very smart, and they built their house out of bricks. But the germ thing, that was a different story. The first little pig, he liked to go shopping on Wednesday. Germs, I can't be bothered to wash my hands. I am sure everything is going to be just fine. And for quite a few weeks, it was fine. And then all of a sudden, one day, he didn't feel so good, and he had a fever and a cough, and he had to stay in bed, and, well, it took him a while. Thankfully, he did get better. Now, the second little pig, he liked to go shopping on Thursday, and he would wash his hands before he went out, and he would wash his hands when he came home, and he would sing the song, but eventually he said, look, nothing's happening to me. I really think this germ thing is all a farce, and I don't really think I have to wash my hands, and he stopped doing it. One Thursday, he went to the grocery store, and after that, he went over to visit his grandmother, and they had some cake and tea, and when he left, he gave her a big hug and a kiss, and he told her how much he loved her. And a few days later, his gran got really sick, and she ended up in the hospital. She was there for a while. Thankfully, she got better. Now, the third little pig, now notice the first 2 were the brothers, she washed her hands every time she went out and every time she came home. And she did not get sick. So one day she had her brothers over for dinner, and she said, wash your hands. And after they did, she said, we saw what happened. To the first little pig, she said, I felt so bad when you were sick. And to the second little pig, I really think you made Gran sick. But I've been washing my hands every time, and I have stayed healthy. And I want you to do it too. And so from then on, all the pigs washed their hands. And they always sang, wash, wash, wash your hands, hear the doctor say, back and front and fingers, so germs will go away. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening, for the people in the audience, and for all the people at home. And I know that nobody else said this, but remember, there is a virtual tip jar. Just in case we want to support Caffè Lena. We're ever thankful for this evening, and we hope that you'll come back again and again and again to hear all the wonderful programs here at Caffè Lena.